It's a really good analogy. Let's weave Patrick into Silicon Valley now. Let's keep it kind of light and fun. So what are some behind the scenes stories about the challenges and triumphs that you encountered while becoming the brand father of the Google Play Store at Google?
It was an amazing time, and that's why when I look at what's happening with artificial intelligence, it brings back so many similarities. Because when I was at Google and I landed there in 2011, I originally landed there to be global marketing director for search on mobile phones. Right, mobile was starting to really take off. I had a lot of experience already in mobile. I'd been working in mobile already for 5 or 6 years by then, which was a long time by anybody's standards. And so they hired me to drive search and to launch search on iPhone, on iTab, on the iPad, etc. And then one day, my boss, who was the chief marketing officer for Android, who reported into Lorraine Tuhill, who's Google CMO, who still is Google CMO. He came to me and said, "Hey, man, look, we have this major problem. We're getting our asses kicked all over the place by Apple. And Apple's App Store is so much better than ours that it literally threatens the Android ecosystem." Right?
Really?
So Android was still pretty new back then, and the software was not as good as it is today. Obviously, the software's made leaps and bounds advancements. The phones were not as good. And so iPhone was really the thing to own. And the integration of the phone and the hardware in the App Store was really one of the things that was making Apple so successful back then and take market share so quickly was that they were really the only player who were very good at integrating hardware with software with this new thing called an App Store, right? Which was launched in 2009. And Google is very much behind the times. I've been competing with them in a small startup for years called GetJar. And it's a startup that in the meantime has been sold and is no longer in the public eye. And that was a small app store. And we had observed what Google was doing with their app store. And we kept scratching our heads and looking and be like, how is Google getting this so wrong? Right? Like their branding is off. The store kind of, the merchandising sucks. And the quality of the app's bad. And they don't have movies. And they don't have music. And every time you want to get a game, all the latest games are on iPhone. They're not on Android. And so I've been observing this for some time. And Google hired me, and it was actually, there's a whole story behind that as well, which if you want we can share with the listeners, because I didn't originally want to go work at Google, which is a whole different story.
Yeah.
So they called me and they're like we need some help with the App Store because it's all fucked up. And I was like, yeah, I've been saying this in public at conferences now for several years that you guys need to change the way that you treat developers, and you really need to work on developing this ecosystem, because people were buying phones based on the ecosystem. If you would talk to consumers and say, why are you buying an iPhone instead of an Android? Some of them would say, I'd like the phone better. It's just easier to use. But other people were saying, I'm buying the iPhone because the games and the apps are so much better. And they have iTunes and they have books. And Google had nothing, right? It's like the poor man's app store. So Google, of course, being Google, they were smart enough to realize, and they're like, we really got to do something about this. And Andy Rubin, who was the founder of Android, which had been acquired by Google,
yes,
and was my boss's boss, was like, he just laid down the law on these guys. We got to completely overhaul this store. We got to rebrand it. We got to relaunch it. We got to build something competitive. And I need this done in 9 months. And when Andy Rubin said something, man, it was like God speaking, right? It was like, all hands on deck, whatever we need to do 24/7. 7 days a week working, and the engineering teams did an amazing job of rolling this thing out as fast as they did. So my task was, okay, you need to handle the marketing part of this. You need to build a team, because I got there was no team. I'm like, how many people do I have? Global launch of this new thing. You have 3 people. I was like, wait, what? So you have to build a team. You have to create a brand, and you have to launch all the verticals, right? So you have to launch books, movies, games, TV shows, everything from a marketing perspective, creating all the videos, all the assets, all the pages, all the graphics. So it was a daunting challenge. It was very cool. And it was funny because when I left GetJar, this startup, and I went to search, I was like, oh, thank God, I'm done with apps and games for a while. And that lasted like 4 months. And then they're like, no, we need to pull you back into apps and games because we have the shit show going on with Android market. We need to relaunch it. We need you to do it. So I was like, okay. So that's how I got pulled into it.
How did you arrive at the name Google Play?
Yeah, that's a fun story in and of itself. Before I arrived, my boss, who'd been wearing like 4 different hats because he didn't have somebody running that team, they'd done a lot of experimentation and analysis, and they had come up with a completely different brand. and they took it to the senior management at Google and Larry Page and all these guys, and everybody was like, no, we don't want a completely new brand because we believe that it needs to tie back to Google somehow, and we believe that it needs to be some sort of a Google derivative, and it needs to connote what the store is all about. And so when I got there and I started working with the team on this, we were like, okay, one limitation is pretty easy. It's got to be called Google something, right? Because we all believe that we have this massive super brand, which when you work at Google is so powerful because everybody knows Google. So we have this massive super brand, but we got to call it Google something, right? But we don't have a mandate to create something from scratch. We couldn't do YouTube or Chrome, right? We could create an entirely new brand without it being attached to Google. And so we tested a whole bunch of iterations. And then when we thought about the experience from a customer perspective, we were like, well, what's the store mostly about? And we thought to ourselves, the vast majority of the use of phones, and this is still true today, sadly, is most of the store is about playing music,
Mhm.
playing videos, and playing games. Like that's what most people use their phones for. And that's where you see the highest level of engagement generally in terms of applications. And so we
I
went through a
was,
lot of iterations and we came across play, right? It was just like the obvious things. Like you play games, you play music. It's there's not much more of a story to it than that. It was just so obvious.
and I will admit,
That
Patrick, when I first heard it, I got to tell you, I didn't like it at first. I was like, Google Play, what the hell's that? Then, marketing guy and started to pay attention to it. It became obvious to me. Sure, of course, it's going to be called Play because of what you just said. Because that's what it is. It's somewhere. It's a place to go play. How does it feel to be part of a legacy product that still lives on today? The Google Play brand still lives on today. I call you the brand father jokingly, but that's pretty cool, Patrick.
it is very cool. I think I don't think about it, that often, Keith, because I think you get so absorbed in a project like that, and really your goal is to provide the best possible experience for people and for
Yeah.
people to hopefully, what I always say is the goal of good marketing is what I call brand love, right? That's the ultimate aspiration of any marketer. It is to create an iconic brand that not only people recognize, but people have an emotional affinity with that, right? So if you look at certain brands globally or in the United States,
Hmm.
I think it's fair to say that Coca-Cola still globally has a very strong emotional connection with consumers, right? Whether you believe in the health benefits of the product, that's a separate question, but it's an amazing brand, right? When you look at Apple, amazing
Mhm.
brand. When you look at Starbucks, amazing brand, right? There are certain brands that people say, no matter how much money you give me, or no matter how much cheaper the competition is, I will not shop there. I will not buy that, right? And
Mhm.
that's where you
Mhm.
get this idea of love. You get a very strong emotional connection, and that's what we were trying to do with Google Play. I couldn't tell you if they ever reached that because I left Google quite some
Sure.
time ago, and so I don't have any data to know whether they reached that goal or not. But that was certainly the idea. And when you looked at the early product videos, there's a video online on YouTube which you can look for called Suitcase, or I don't know what if it's called Google Play launch video or Suitcase video or whatever. But the launch video was all around bringing out that emotional connection with people. And there was an award winning, we won like awards at Cannes for that and stuff like that. So building a brand that is so ubiquitous that everybody knows, that I think a lot of people do feel strongly about, that is amazingly rewarding.
I I would think it would be also amazingly rewarding, and maybe you have or have not thought about this, but people touch your brand. Like it's in their
Yes.
hands, it's in their pockets. They use their fingers to touch it and scroll with it. And as a creator, yourself as a creator, as somebody who makes stuff that you want people to buy and appreciate, that has to be very rewarding as well. Like honestly.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's very cool. I've had similar feelings. I worked for Pepsi briefly at the beginning of my career, and I launched like Pepsi Max and Seven Up and stuff in
Yeah.
Latin America. And when you see brands come to life and people talking about them and consuming them, it is a very cool feeling, right? I think as entrepreneurs, you've been an entrepreneur as well. When you create something from scratch, and people see value in that, and
Hmm.
people the brand values, they understand what you're trying to do as a brand, they understand what the brand stands for, what it means. That part's really special, right? It's
Hmm.
like people People look at Patagonia, which is one of my favorite brands, right? There's a lot of values behind that, right? These guys really stand for something. They have a purpose. They have very clear values in terms of the environment and things like that. And when consumers really get that, then as a marketer, you're like, wow, I've actually done my job. Like the brand is transmitting what the intent was when we started this whole project. And from ideation to realization is it's a journey. It's pretty cool.
Mhm. Patrick, what was the most surprising lesson you learned during the creation and launch of the Google Play Store?
Wow, that's a good question. What was the most surprising thing I learned? One of the things I learned at Google is something that we saw this week with OpenAI. And I think one of the most surprising things I learned at Google was you can have remarkably intelligent people working on something make amazingly stupid mistakes. And that's because in our society, we look at intelligence as just raw IQ, right? The ability to solve very difficult problems or to create technologies or whatever. What we fail to appreciate often in society, and the genesis behind a lot of the mistakes made at OpenAI this week, is what I call EQ, right? Emotional intelligence. And one of the things that surprised me, not always in a positive way, at Google and in Silicon Valley, was the lack of emphasis placed on emotional intelligence. Because when you don't instill a healthy level of emotional intelligence in leaders, they will make what could be perceived as very basic mistakes, right? In terms of communication, in terms of trampling on people's feelings, in terms of lack of empathy, in terms of pushing people too hard, pushing people to the breaking point. We had a lot of people on the play team that left after play launched because they were just so exhausted and so burnt out. My marketing team, when I left the company, half those people left. And so I think one of the things I learned that was very valuable was the importance of good leadership, the importance of really training people to be good leaders, explaining to managers what it means to really listen to a person as opposed to just talk, what it means to really empathize with an employee when they are having a really bad time at home and are not performing at work. And that's something which I think Silicon Valley still needs a lot of help on. They build amazing things. They do it at breakneck speed, but sometimes they do it in a way which hurts a lot of people, damages the culture of the company, does not pay attention to the values on which the company is found, right? And even Google has made these mistakes, despite being probably more progressive and self-aware on a lot of these things. So that's on the not so good side of things, areas to improve. I think in terms of the good things is I think when you work with a level of people who are that talented, and when you have such a strong culture as Google did, I don't know if it still does, because of course I've been gone for a long time, so I can't really comment on Google's culture today. But when you have such a strong culture and such a strong value, accompanied with just a raw, insane amount of talent, what you can do as an organization is remarkable, which is why when everybody decided to poo-poo Google 6 months ago when OpenAI launched ChatGPT, some of us, maybe ex-Googlers especially, laughed and said, this is the beginning of a long battle. Don't rule Google out. It's still Google. And I think they are responding. They're turning that ship. It's a big ship, but they're turning that ship as quickly as they can. And they are building some remarkable things in integrating artificial intelligence into a lot of their products. It's a testament to what they're able to do as an organization and what you can do when you combine strong culture and values with insane engineering talent and just raw human talent. So yeah, those are some of my learnings. I learned a ton of things at Google.